The dimensional tear opened at exactly 11:47 p.m. in a Vought International Research Facility that officially didn't exist 3 levels beneath the streets of Lower Manhattan in a laboratory dedicated to projects that would never appear in shareholder reports. Dr. Sarah Chen had been running the same experiment for 6 weeks, attempting to synthesize a stable variant of Compound 5 that could grant flight without the psychological side effects that plagued their current test subjects. The energy readings had been nominal, the containment field holding steady, every parameter within acceptable ranges. Then the numbers spiked. Not gradually. Not with the kind of warning that let you hit emergency shutdown protocols. Just a vertical line on every monitor, simultaneously reality itself hiccuping. And suddenly there was a man standing in the center of the containment chamber where seconds before there had been only carefully calibrated emptiness. He was massive, not tall. In the way basketball players were tall, but built on a scale that suggested different engineering principles, shoulders that belonged on draft animal, a chest that could have been load-bearing architecture. His hair defied gravity in blonde spikes, and even through the observation glass, even with alarms screaming and emergency lights strobing, Dr. Chen could see his eyes scanning the room with the methodical assessment of someone trained to evaluate threats. The security team arrived in 40 seconds, which was excellent response time, but still left enough space for the unknown variable to have killed everyone in the lab, if that had been his intention. They materialized from hidden panels, 6 enhanced individuals whose files listed capabilities ranging from molecular density manipulation to localized gravitational control. The blond man raised both hands, palms out. Not surrender the posture was wrong for that. More like a request for pause for conversation before confrontation. Where am I? His voice carried through the speakers with a quality that suggested he'd spent years projecting to audiences clear and resonant despite the reinforced barriers. This isn't... He stopped recalibrating. I need to speak with whoever's in charge. There's been some kind of accident. Dr. Chen hit the intercom. Sir, you're in a secure facility. We need you to remain calm and follow instructions. I'm calm. And he was, she realized. No elevated heart rate visible in his breathing, no signs of panic despite materializing in an underground laboratory surrounded by armed personnel. But I need information. How did I get here? What city is this? What country? You're in New York, United States. How did you... New York? He processed this with visible effort. I was in Japan. I was... Again, that recalibration thoughts reorganizing behind blue eyes that reminded her uncomfortably of someone else. I don't know how I got here. One moment I was investigating an anomaly near Camino, and then there was a sensation like being pulled through something very small, and now I'm here. The security chief made a hand signal. Dr. Chen shook her head slightly. Whatever this man was, he wasn't behaving like a threat. And the energy readings from his arrival suggested capabilities that made their enhanced security team look like children playing dress-up. Sir, I'm going to need you to remain in the containment area while we sort this out. We'll get you some answers, but first, we need to run some tests. No tests. Said flatly without hostility, but with absolute finality. I appreciate your position, but I won't be treated as a subject. I'll cooperate with questions. I'll wait while you contact appropriate authorities. But I'm not your prisoner. Nobody said prisoner. We're just trying to establish. The phone on Dr. Chen's desk rang. Not her mobile, not the lab line, but the red handset that connected directly to executive offices 300 feet above, and had never once rung in her 18 months at this facility. She picked it up. Secure him, a voice said without preamble. Full containment protocols. We're sending a team down. Sir, he's not hostile. he's cooperating. He's an unknown asset that appeared in our most sensitive laboratory. Secure him now, or security will do it for you." The line went dead. Dr. Chen looked at the man in the containment chamber, at the security team, waiting for orders, at the readings still scrolling across her monitors, showing energy signatures that didn't match anything in their database. "I'm sorry," she said into the intercom. "I've been instructed to ask you to remain where you are until our executive team arrives." The man nodded slowly. "And if I refuse, then people will try to make you stay. And I think people will get hurt." "Yes." He looked at the security team with an expression that wasn't quite pity. They would. 20 minutes later, the executive team arrived, 3 suits, whose faces belonged to people who made decisions about other people's lives and slept perfectly well afterward. They filed into the observation room with the confidence of individuals who had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved with sufficient application of money or force. The lead suit, Martin Hendricks, VP of Special Assets, according to Dr. Chen's briefing, studied the man in the containment chamber with the expression of someone appraising livestock. Do we know what he can do? Energy reading suggests strength beyond our current soup baseline. The spatial displacement implies either teleportation capability or involuntary dimensional transit. No obvious weaknesses detected. So he's valuable. Potentially extremely valuable if he's cooperative. Hendricks smiled the way sharks would smile if they understood the social benefits of appearing friendly. Everyone's cooperative with the right incentive structure. He activated the intercom. "Good evening. I'm Martin Hendricks, Vought International. I understand you've had quite a disorienting experience." You could say that. The man had been standing motionless for 20 minutes, apparently content to wait. No pacing, no agitation, just patience backed by the kind of discipline that came from extensive training. "I'd appreciate any information you can provide about what happened." "We're still investigating. But in the meantime, we'd like to offer our assistance. Vought International specializes in enhanced individuals' soups, as the public calls them. We provide support resources management services. Given your evident capabilities, we'd be interested in discussing representation." Representation? Branding, public relations, crisis management, legal protection. The world can be complicated for people with extraordinary abilities. We make it simpler. I see. The man's expression suggested he saw quite clearly. And in exchange, a partnership. We handle the business side, you handle. Whatever it is you do, everyone benefits. I appreciate the offer, but I'll have to decline. I'm not interested in corporate partnership. Hendricks' smile didn't waver. I understand. This is all very sudden. Why don't we get you settled somewhere more comfortable, give you time to process, and we can revisit the conversation tomorrow? I'd prefer to leave now, actually. I need to understand what happened, find a way back to my world if possible, and make sure no one was harmed by whatever phenomenon brought me here. I'm afraid that's not possible. You appeared in a highly secure facility without authorization. We have protocols. Then I'll speak with local law enforcement. File whatever reports are necessary. But I'm not staying in your facility. The smile finally cracked. Sir, you don't seem to understand your position. You're an unregistered, enhanced individual who appeared via unknown means in a restricted area. We could have you detained indefinitely just on national security grounds. You could try. The temperature in the observation room dropped several degrees despite the climate control. Hendricks made a gesture. The security team began advancing on the containment chamber, preparing to reinforce it with additional barriers to transform it from holding area to prison. The blond man sighed, a sound of disappointment rather than fear. I really don't want to hurt anyone. Please don't make me. He moved. Not super speed in the way Vaught's files described a train's velocity. Not teleportation like their spatially gifted assets. Just momentum and mass applied with surgical precision. A step that cracked the containment floor. A shoulder that hit the reinforced barrier at an angle calculated to redirect rather than destroy an exit that left the chamber intact but fundamentally compromised. The security team converged. The man didn't fight them so much as move through them. Each deflection minimal, each redirect just enough to prevent harm, while making clear that resistance was futile. In 15 seconds, he was standing in the observation room, and the 6 enhanced guards were conscious, but comprehensively outmaneuvered. Hendricks had his phone out already calling for backup that would arrive too late. The other suits had backed against the far wall, discovering that corporate authority meant nothing when physical reality failed to cooperate. The man looked at Dr. Chen. "I'm sorry about your equipment. I'll try to minimize damage on my way out." Wait. She wasn't sure why she said it, except that watching someone refuse to be commodified by Vought felt like witnessing something rare. "The elevator requires biometric authorization. You'll need my clearance to reach ground level." "I appreciate that, but I'll manage." "The reinforced doors will slow me down for approximately 8 seconds. But thank you for the warning." He walked to the elevator, examined the biometric scanner for perhaps 3 seconds, then simply tore the doors open with his bare hands. The metal screamed its protest, but yielded, and he was climbing the shaft before additional security could respond. Dr. Chen watched him disappear into darkness, heard the distant sounds of obstacles being methodically removed, and wondered what exactly they'd just allowed into their world. Hendricks was already on the phone with someone several levels above his pay grade. "Yes, sir." "Unknown asset, extreme strength, non-compliant." "No, sir, containment failed." "Yes, sir, I understand." "Pursuing now would be inadvisable." He listened for another 30 seconds, his expression shifting from defensive to calculating. "Understood. I'll coordinate with 7 Tower immediately." He ended the call and looked at Dr. Chen. "Get me everything. Energy signatures, dimensional coordinates, every reading you have. We're not letting this one slip away." The hunt had begun. 20 blocks north, Toshinori Yagi stood on a rooftop and looked out at a city that was familiar in geography, but alien in every other dimension. The skyline was right. He recognized the basic shape of Manhattan, though many details were different. But the feeling was wrong. The ambient energy, the way people moved on the streets below the advertisements, glowing on every surface, selling not just products, but heroes themselves. This wasn't his world. That much was certain. The question was whether he could get back, and if not, what his responsibility was to wherever he'd landed. His phone buzzed, not the one from his world, which had stopped functioning the moment he arrived, but a smartphone he'd borrowed from an electronics store, leaving enough cash to cover the cost plus interest. He'd need to understand this place, and that required information. The device came preloaded with news applications, social media search engines. He began reading, learning, assembling a picture of this reality piece by piece. And slowly, the shape of it emerged. A world where enhanced individuals existed, yes, but where they were owned, marketed, controlled by corporations. Where heroism was a brand and saving lives was a business opportunity. Where the 7 stood as the apex of power, and a man named Homelander smiled from every screen like a god made flesh. Toshinori had faced many kinds of evil in his career. This was a new variety, not dark and skulking, but bright and gleaming and hiding in plain sight behind favorable press coverage. His phone buzzed again. Not a news alert this time, but a message from an unknown number. Welcome to New York. Vought International would like to schedule a meeting at your earliest convenience. We have much to discuss regarding your future. He deleted it. Another message arrived immediately. Mr. Yagi, we know what you are. We can provide resources, protection, legal standing, or we can make your presence here very difficult. The choice is yours. Toshinori looked at the screen for a long moment, then typed a single sentence. I don't need protection. I need to understand how to help. The response was instantaneous. Then come to Vought Tower, tomorrow, 9 a.m. Ask for Madeline Stillwell. She'll explain how heroism works in this world. He almost declined. But information was necessary, and understanding the system required seeing it from the inside. I'll be there, he typed. The third message came from a different number entirely untraceable, according to the phone's own security features. If you're smart, you'll run. Vought doesn't make offers, they make acquisitions. A concerned party. Toshinori smiled without humor. Running had never been his style. He had 24 hours to learn what he could about this world, this city, this corporate machinery that had transformed heroism into commodity. 24 hours to prepare for a meeting with people who thought strength could be bought and principles could be negotiated. They were going to be disappointed. The city spread out below him, millions of lives going about their business, unaware that someone new had arrived. Someone who still believed that heroes existed to serve, not to profit. Someone who was about to discover just how much that belief would cost. In Vought Tower, in a penthouse that looked down on the city like a throne room, Homelander stood at his window and listened to Madeline Stillwell explain the situation. An unknown soup. Extreme strength, apparently. Dimensional displacement. Non-compliant personality. We're working on acquisition. And if he doesn't want to be acquired, then we remind him what happens to soups who operate outside Vaught's structure. Accidents, legal troubles, public scandals. The usual. Homelander didn't respond immediately. He was watching the city, the lights, the people who worshipped him, without knowing what he actually was. Another soup, another potential threat to his supremacy, another variable that needed to be controlled or eliminated. What's his name? He asked. We're still establishing that. He used a name Toshinori Yagi, but we haven't found any records. Set up the meeting. I'll be there. Homelander, that's not necessary. We can handle. I'll be there. Not a request. Not a suggestion. A statement of territorial dominance of hierarchy being maintained. Madeline knew better than to argue. Of course, 9 a.m. tomorrow. When she left, Homelander remained at his window, looking out at his city, his country, his world. Everything carefully constructed, carefully maintained, carefully controlled. And somewhere out there, someone new had just arrived. Someone who didn't know the rules yet. Someone who would need to be taught, one way or another. The pieces were in motion. The collision was inevitable. And when it came, this world would discover that some things, some people couldn't be bought, branded, or broken. At least not easily. Not without a fight. The morning sun hit Vought Tower like a spotlight on a stage, which was exactly what it was designed for. Every angle of the glass and steel monolith had been engineered to catch light, to shimmer, to remind anyone looking up that this was where gods lived. Or at least, that's what the marketing department called them. Toshinori Yagi stood in a backstage prep room watching technicians scurry past with cables and clipboards. Less than 12 hours since the dimensional tear had pulled him from his world into this one, and already Vought International had scheduled him for a public debut. The efficiency would have been impressive if it weren't so transparently calculated. A handler whose name he hadn't caught yet thrust a contract toward him for the third time. "Mr. Yagi, if you just initial here, and here." "I appreciate your persistence," Toshinori said, keeping his voice level despite the tightness in his chest. His muscled form, still in its empowered state from sheer force of will, filled the doorway. "But as I explained to your colleagues last night, I don't sign away my actions to any organization." The handler's professional smile cracked slightly. "The debut event is in 40 minutes. We need the paperwork finalized." "Then I suppose we have a problem." The woman opened her mouth to argue, but movement in the hallway caught both their attention. The crowd of technicians parted like a sea, and Homelander glided through his cape, settling behind him with practiced perfection. Up close in the harsh fluorescent lighting, his smile had the warmth of polished marble. "Toshinori," Homelander said, extending a hand. The grip was firm enough to crush concrete, but Toshinori matched it without flinching. "Big day? You ready to meet your new fans?" "I'm ready to help people if that's what you're asking." Something flickered behind Homelander's blue eyes. Recognition, perhaps, of a game he couldn't immediately win. His smile widened a fraction. "That's exactly what we do here. Help people. Save the day. Give them someone to believe in." He gestured toward the hallway leading to the stage. "Come on, I'll show you how it's done." The event space was a carefully orchestrated production. Thousands of phones pointed upward like offerings to digital gods. News cameras lined the elevated platforms. A massive LED screen displayed the Vought logo in pulsing red and white. The seven stood on the main stage in a practiced formation. Homelander at center, Queen Maeve to his right, A-Train and the Deep flanking the sides. Starlight stood slightly apart, her LED-accented costume glowing softly, and even from backstage, Toshinori could see the tension in her shoulders. A PR executive appeared at his elbow, speaking rapidly into his ear. "When Homelander introduces you, walk to the X marked on the stage. Wave, smile, don't talk about Japan or wherever you're from. Vaught's positioning you as a new American asset. 3 minutes max, then you exit stage left." "And if people need help during those 3 minutes?" The executive blinked. "I'm sorry." "If there's an emergency, who coordinates the response?" "We have security protocols. But this is a controlled event, Mr. Yagi. Nothing will happen that isn't supposed to." Toshinori looked past the executive to the crowd beyond. Families, children on shoulders, elderly couples who'd probably waited in line for hours. All of them looking toward the stage with the kind of desperate hope he recognized from his own world, the need to believe someone strong would protect them when danger came. That need was supposed to be met with responsibility, not performance. Homelander's voice boomed across the plaza, amplified to stadium levels. "And now I want to introduce you to someone special. You've seen the footage from last night, the impossible rescue, the raw strength. Ladies and gentlemen, our newest guardian, All Might." The crowd erupted. Toshinori walked onto the stage, and the noise hit him like a physical wave. He raised one hand, not quite a wave more, an acknowledgement. Homelander's grip on his shoulder was possessive, steering him toward the marked spot, with a strength that suggested he could snap bone if necessary. "Tell them what you told me." Homelander said, his voice carrying that strange, dual quality, warm for the audience, with an edge of steel underneath meant only for Toshinori. "About helping people." Toshinori looked out at the sea of faces. In his world, he'd learned to smile through pain, through fear, through the crushing weight of being a symbol. But that smile had always served a purpose to tell people they were safe, because he would protect them. Here, surrounded by cameras and brand logos and carefully positioned superheroes, the smile felt like it would be a lie. He opened his mouth to speak, and the world exploded. Not a metaphor. An actual explosion 3 blocks east sent a pillar of smoke rising above the skyline. The crowd's cheers turned to screams. People scattered in every direction, parents clutching children, the elderly knocked aside in the panic. The 7 moved, but not toward the danger. Homelander held up both hands in a calming gesture, cape billowing dramatically. "Everyone stay calm. We've got this under control." A-Train appeared next to an assistant director, speaking rapidly. "Where are the cameras? Get them pointed east. We need to capture this." Queen Maeve had already taken flight toward the explosion site, but she circled back when her earpiece crackled. Through the chaos, Toshinori heard fragments of the transmission. "Wait for the drone coverage. Better lighting from the south. Make sure we get the money shot." The Deep was arguing with a cameraman about his best angle. And the smoke kept rising. Toshinori's body moved before his mind fully processed the decision. One moment he stood on the marked X, the next he was airborne, the stage cracking beneath the force of his launch. Wind tore at his face as he accelerated, the city shrinking and expanding simultaneously in his vision. There the crowd still panicking there, the emergency vehicles just starting to respond there, the smoke and flame pouring from a collapsed commercial building. He hit the ground 3 blocks away, hard enough to crater the asphalt. Dust and debris swirled around him, but through it, he could see the situation with terrible clarity. A gas main rupture, probably triggered by faulty infrastructure. The building's ground floor had collapsed, trapping dozens inside. Fire clawed up the remaining structure's skeleton. People hung from windows on the upper floors, smoke billowing around them, their screams cutting through the roar of flames. Behind him, Toshinori heard the whine of camera drones arriving. The Deep touched down nearby, struck a pose, then looked around with visible confusion. When he realized there were no photographers close enough to capture it properly. "Stand back," Toshinori said. Not a request. The Deep blinked. "We're supposed to wait for stand back or get clear, now." He didn't wait for compliance. The building was weakening concrete, groaning under stress steel supports, glowing red from heat. Every second of delay meant someone died. Toshinori bent his knees, feeling one for all, surged through his legs like lightning through a conductor, and jumped. The impact as he landed on the 2nd floor sent shockwaves through the structure. But he'd calculated the angle precisely, force directed downward through the support columns, stabilizing rather than collapsing them. Smoke filled his lungs immediately, thick and chemical. He could taste burning plastic, melting insulation, the acrid bite of gas. Through the darkness, he heard coughing, crying, terrified voices calling for help in multiple languages. "I am here," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos, not with volume, but with certainty. "Stay calm. I will get you out." A family huddled against the far wall. Mother, father, 2 small children. The father was bleeding from a head wound, the mother clutching both kids close. Toshinori crossed to them in 3 strides, gathering all 4 in his arms, with practiced efficiency. The mother started to protest, to say something about her purse, and Toshinori simply shook his head. "Hold on." He jumped again this time, carrying 400 pounds of terrified human cargo, and the force of his exit punched a hole through the weakened wall. They sailed through smoke and ash and hit the street, rolling Toshinori's body, absorbing the impact, so his passengers felt nothing worse than turbulence. He set them down behind a fire truck, already turning back, before the mother could finish saying thank you. The building groaned. A support beam on the third floor buckled, sending a shower of sparks cascading down. Toshinori saw movement in the window, an elderly man oxygen tank beside him, unable to move fast enough to escape. Starlight appeared beside Toshinori in a flash of light, her expression tight, with something that looked like guilt. "We should coordinate. Homelander's organizing." "There's no time for organization. Third floor east window. Can you fly?" "I can, yes, but get him out. I'll handle the rest." He didn't wait to see if she obeyed. A Detroit smash through the building's main entrance cleared debris and created a path, the focused air pressure blasting rubble aside while leaving the overhead supports intact. The precision required was enormous, too much force, and the whole structure pancaked too little, and the blockage remained. But he'd practiced this kind of rescue 1,000 times in his world, learned to judge load-bearing walls by sound and stress fractures by sight. Inside the smoke was a living thing clawing at his throat and burning his eyes. Toshinori dropped low where the air was clearer and started moving through the ground floor systematically. An office worker trapped under a desk lifted the desk with one hand, pulled the man free with the other. Two teenagers who'd been in the coffee shop when the floor gave way, one conscious, one not. He draped both over his shoulders and kept moving. The building was actively dying now. He could feel it in the way the floor vibrated beneath his feet. The tortured shriek of metal being pushed past its breaking point. 30 seconds, maybe less, before catastrophic collapse. A woman's voice, faint, coming from behind a locked utility door. "Help, please." The door was steel-warped from heat. The lock fused solid. Toshinori set down his current rescues, gently took 3 steps back and delivered a Texas smash that tore the door off its hinges and sent it skidding across what remained of the lobby. The woman inside was a janitor. Her uniform singed her face, streaked with soot and tears. She stared at him like he was a hallucination. "Can you walk?" She nodded, mute with shock. "Then walk. Out that way. Don't stop." He grabbed the 2 teenagers again, added the office worker to the load, and bulldozed toward the exit, just as the ceiling began its final surrender to gravity. The roar was deafening concrete and steel and glass, all giving way at once, a localized apocalypse, measured in decibels and falling tons. Toshinori cleared the entrance as the building imploded behind him, the shockwave hitting his back like a giant slap. He stumbled, caught himself, set his rescues down on the sidewalk where paramedics immediately swarmed them. Fire and dust billowed outward, and he turned back to face it, counting heads running through mental calculations. 3rd floor occupancy, 2nd floor offices, ground level retail. Starlight landed beside him with the elderly man and his oxygen tank. Her costume was scorched, her face smudged with ash, but the man was alive and already being taken to an ambulance. "I think that's everyone," she said, her voice rough from smoke. "The building's been evacuated all week for renovations. These were just stragglers who didn't get the memo." Toshinori nodded, still watching the wreckage. Around them, emergency responders were establishing a perimeter. Firefighters deploying hoses, police redirecting traffic. And everywhere cameras. So many cameras capturing every angle of the destruction and the survivors and the 2 costumed figures standing amid the chaos. A-Train appeared in a blur, skidding to a stop with his usual dramatic flair. He looked at the collapsed building, then at Toshinori, then at the cameras. His smile was reflexive, performative. "Nice work. We should do a statement. The people need to hear from their heroes. The people need medical attention and shelter," Toshinori said flatly. "And this area needs to be secured before secondary collapses start." "Right, yeah, obviously. But after that, we help the next person who needs it." The crowd that had scattered during the explosion was reforming, now kept back by police barriers but pressing close phones out, recording everything. Toshinori could hear fragments of their conversations, and the tone was different from the worship he'd heard at the Vought event. These voices carried shock and gratitude, and something rawer, the kind of desperate relief that came from being genuinely saved rather than being sold a performance. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, ducked under the barrier before her mother could stop her. She ran straight to Toshinori and wrapped her arms around his leg. Her face pressed against his costume, her whole body shaking with sobs that might have been terror or relief, or both. Toshinori knelt slowly, bringing himself to her eye level. Soot covered most of his face now, sweat cutting clean trails through the grime. But he found that smile not the performance smile, the real one. The one that said, "You're safe now because I'm here, and I won't let anything hurt you." "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe." The girl's mother arrived, apologizing profusely, trying to pull her daughter back. But the girl held on for another moment, and in that moment, Toshinori saw what he'd been missing since he arrived in this world. Not cameras, not contracts, not staged events with marked X's and 3-minute time limits. Just a child who needed to know someone would protect her. When he finally stood, the cameras were still recording, but their presence felt distant, secondary. Starlight was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Recognition, maybe, or something close to it. A-Train had already zipped away to file his report or update his social media or whatever it was Vought's heroes did after disasters. The smoke continued to rise black against the afternoon sky. Emergency vehicles filled the street, their lights painting everything in red and blue strobes. Survivors sat wrapped in shock blankets, giving statements to police reuniting with loved ones who'd feared the worst. Toshinori turned back toward Vought Tower, visible in the distance, and found Homelander hovering there at middle altitude. Even across 3 blocks and through the haze, those blue eyes were unmistakable. Watching. Calculating. The leader of the 7 hung suspended against the sky like a question mark, his cape barely moving in the wind. The message was clear enough. This wasn't over. Toshinori's phone buzzed, the Vought-issued one they'd given him last night. A text from an unknown number. "Debrief in conference room 7, 1 hour, non-negotiable." He deleted it and walked toward the nearest ambulance, where a paramedic was struggling to stabilize an elderly woman's oxygen levels. The medic looked up, started to ask for an autograph, then saw Toshinori's expression and went quiet. "What do you need?" Toshinori asked. "Her oxygen tank was damaged. We're waiting for a replacement, but with the traffic." "Where's the nearest hospital?" "Mercy General." But Toshinori was already lifting the woman onto a stretcher, one hand steadying the IV line, the other supporting her weight as if she were made of air. "Which direction?" The paramedic pointed, stammering something about protocols and authorization. But Toshinori was already moving. Not the explosive speed he'd used to reach the building, but a careful, measured pace that wouldn't jostle his passenger or snap the medical equipment keeping her alive. He covered the 6 blocks to Mercy General in 90 seconds, drawing stares from pedestrians, but not stopping until he'd carried the woman through the emergency room doors and transferred her to the waiting trauma team. Only then, standing in the sterile hospital corridor while doctors rushed past him, did Toshinori allow himself to acknowledge the pain. Not physical, his body could handle far worse than smoke inhalation and minor impacts. But the exhaustion that came from maintaining his muscled form was creeping in at the edges, and beneath that, something deeper. The weight of understanding that he'd arrived in a world where saving lives came second to capturing the right camera angle. His phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. "You missed the debrief. This is a violation of your provisional agreement. Report to tower immediately." Toshinori stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back a single word, "No." The response came within seconds. "You are under VOT jurisdiction. Compliance is mandatory." He typed, "I'm under nobody's jurisdiction. I help people, that's all." This time the phone stayed silent. Toshinori walked back out into the afternoon heat, the hospital's automatic doors sliding shut behind him. Somewhere across the city, VOT International's crisis management team was probably scrambling, trying to figure out how to spin his non-compliance into their narrative. Let them scramble. He had more important things to do, like figuring out how to get home, or failing that, how to survive in a world where heroes were products and disasters were opportunities. His phone buzzed one more time. Different number. The message was 3 words, "We should talk." No signature, but the area code was local. Toshinori stared at it, weighing risks against potential allies, isolation against information. Finally, he typed back, "When and where?" The response was immediate. "Tonight, 10 p.m., corner of 5th and Morrison, come alone." Toshinori pocketed the phone and started walking. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the city in shades of amber and shadow. Around him, New York's evening rhythm accelerated. Taxis honking, pedestrians rushing to catch trains, the eternal urban symphony of movement and noise and life. In his world, he'd been called the symbol of peace. Here he wasn't sure what he was. A refugee, a complication, a man with impossible strength in a world that had commodified impossibility. But as he walked through streets still smelling of smoke from the rescue past windows, where televisions replayed footage of him pulling people from the collapsing building, past a newsstand where the early edition's headline read, "Who is All Might?" He knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever this world wanted to make him, whoever was waiting at 5th and Morrison, however, Vought tried to control or eliminate or exploit what he represented. None of that would change his answer to the fundamental question. Someone needed help. He would be there. Everything else was just details. The sun touched the horizon, and Toshinori Yagi walked deeper into a city that didn't yet know whether to fear him, worship him, or figure out how to sell him. In a tower made of glass and steel and carefully constructed lies, Homelander stood at a window and watched the streets below. Somewhere out there, the new variable was making decisions that would affect the carefully balanced ecosystem Vought had built. Decisions that threatened the order of things. Homelander's reflection in the glass smiled back at him, perfect and cold. "Let's see how long you last," he said to the empty room, his voice carrying the kind of certainty that came from never having been challenged. But in his chest, beneath the costume and the ego and the decades of cultivation, something else stirred. Not quite fear, not quite rage, recognition. He'd seen that look before, the determination, the refusal to play by established rules, the dangerous sincerity. He'd seen it in mirrors once before. Vought had taught him what real power looked like, and he'd learned to kill it before it could become a problem. Outside, the city prepared for night. Emergency crews continued their work at the collapsed building. Survivors called loved ones. Hospitals processed the injured. And somewhere in the space between the official narrative and the reality that had just unfolded, a question began to form in the public consciousness. What if there was a different kind of hero? The answer would come soon enough. In violence and revelation, in choices made under pressure, in the collision between what power could take and what responsibility demanded it give. But first, there was a meeting to attend. At the corner of 5th and Morrison, the streetlight flickered twice and went dark. Someone was waiting. The safe house smelled like old takeout and conspiracy. Billy Butcher stood at the window of the converted warehouse, watching traffic crawl past on the street below. While behind him, MM spread surveillance photos across a folding table that had seen better decades. Frenchie was doing something complicated with a laptop in what looked like a jury-rigged cell tower in miniature. Kimiko sat cross-legged in the corner, cleaning her nails with a knife. Huey paced. "We don't know anything about him," Huey said for the third time in as many minutes. "He just shows up out of nowhere, lifts a building like it's made of cardboard, and we're supposed to trust him." "We're not supposed to do anything except watch," Butcher said without turning from the window. His reflection in the glass showed a face that had forgotten how to relax, sometime around 2015. "That's what we do, mate. We watch soups, we learn their patterns, we find their weaknesses." "He doesn't have a pattern yet. He's been here 2 days." "Everyone's got a pattern." Butcher pulled a flask from his coat, took a pull, and finally turned to face the room. "Question is whether his pattern is genuine Boy Scout or Vought's new attack dog with better PR training." Mem tapped one of the photos, a blurry shot of Toshinori pulling the elderly woman from the collapsed building. "Man didn't wait for permission, didn't check with handlers, didn't pose for the drones. Which means he's either the real deal or playing a long game we haven't figured out yet." Butcher grabbed a chair, spun it backward, and straddled it like he was about to interrogate furniture. "Frenchie, what did you get from their network?" Frenchie looked up from his electronic surgery eyes, bright behind smudged glasses. "Vought is having what you call a marriage show. Yes, internal emails, they are very angry. This Almighty does not answer his phone. He does not come to meetings. He ignores their NDAs like they are, how do you say, toilet paper." "Doesn't mean he's clean," Butcher said. "Could be negotiating for a bigger cut." "He carried an old lady 6 blocks to a hospital," Huey said. "After the cameras left. After everyone stopped watching. MM pulled the traffic footage." MM nodded, pulling up a grainy video on his tablet. The 4 of them watched Toshinori jog through evening traffic, a stretcher balanced on his shoulders, his face set with concentration that had nothing to do with public image and everything to do with not letting his passenger die. The video ended. Nobody spoke for a moment. "Could still be an act," Butcher said, but his voice carried less conviction than before. "Or," Huey said carefully, "he could actually be what he looks like, someone who helps people." Butcher's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Nobody with that kind of juice is clean, Huey. You should know that by now." Kimiko made a soft noise, not quite agreement, not quite disagreement. She'd seen things that made Butcher's cynicism look optimistic, and she'd also seen enough of humanity's capacity for cruelty to recognize its opposite when it appeared. Frenchie's laptop chimed. He squinted at the screen, then let out a low whistle. "We have a problem, mes amis. Vought just issued an internal bounty, 24 hours to bring this All Might back into compliance. And they are not being, how you say, subtle about enforcement methods." "Meaning?" "Meaning they're sending soups, plural, to make a statement." Butcher stood so fast his chair clattered backward. "When, according to their logistics channel tonight, Industrial Sector Brooklyn, they are setting up a scenario to make him look, what is the word, unhinged. Out of control. Dangerous." MM was already pulling up maps on his tablet. "They're going to stage something. Make him react, film it wrong, cut it to look like he's the threat." "Classic Vought playbook," Huey said. His voice had gone tight. He'd seen this pattern before, back when he was just a guy who worked at an electronics store and thought superheroes were the good guys. Before A-Train ran through Robin at supersonic speed and left Huey holding nothing but her hands. They did it to Starlight when she started asking questions. They'll do it to anyone who doesn't play ball, Butcher grabbed his jacket from the back of a chair, already moving toward the door. Get the van. Frenchie, I need eyes on that location 5 minutes ago. Huey, I'm coming. You're staying here where it's safe. Butcher, I'm coming. The two of them stared at each other, a familiar argument playing out in shorthand in silence. Finally, Butcher jerked his head toward the door. Fine. But you do what I say when I say it, or I'm tossing you out the van while it's still moving. Clear? Clear. The industrial sector of Brooklyn at night looked like civilization had given up halfway through construction and wandered off to find something more promising. Warehouses squatted in rows, their windows dark or broken graffiti climbing their walls like ivy made of spray paint. Streetlights worked in patches, creating islands of illumination, surrounded by shadow deep enough to hide anything. The boys' van sat 2 blocks from the target location, engine off, running on battery power for the surveillance equipment. Through the windshield, they watched a scene being carefully orchestrated. Vought had brought in extras, people who looked homeless, people who looked like workers, all of them with the slightly too clean appearance of actors playing parts. Crew members dressed in black moved equipment into position, setting up what Frenchie identified as remote detonation charges and gas dispersal units. They're going to blow something, said quietly. Make it look like he lost control. Film the aftermath. And when he tries to help, they'll edit it to look like assault. Huey's hands were shaking slightly. Then they release it to every news network, every social platform, every... We get it, Butcher interrupted. Question is what we do about it. Kimiko, watching through binoculars, made a sharp gesture. A figure had appeared at the far end of the street, walking with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested destination rather than wandering. Toshinori Yagi looked different away from the chaos of rescue operations. His muscled form was present, but somehow less overwhelming, as if he'd learned to carry immense strength the way other people carried everyday burdens, visible if you looked, invisible if you didn't need it. He wore civilian clothes that fit poorly across shoulders, built for different proportions, and his face carried the kind of exhaustion that came from jet lag, plus dimensional displacement, plus being hunted by a corporation that could buy countries. He stopped at the intersection Vought had chosen for their ambush, and simply stood there, hands in pockets, apparently waiting. He knows, Frenchie breathed. He knows it's a trap. Then why's he walking into it? Butcher demanded. Maybe he thinks he can handle it. Or maybe he's got a death wish. Huey grabbed the van door handle. We should warn him. Butcher caught his wrist. And blow our cover, show Vought. We're watching. That's how you get dead, Huey. He doesn't deserve... The explosion cut him off. Not the building charges, those were still waiting for their cue. This was something else, smaller, coming from a parked delivery truck 3 buildings down. Fire bloomed orange and hot, and the shockwave rattled windows half a block away. The extras scattered on cue, screaming their scripted terror. The Vought crew triggered smoke machines, adding to the chaos. And from the shadows, 3 soups emerged. The first was someone the boys' files identified as Groundswell, a B-list bruiser with enhanced strength and durability usually assigned to crowd control and intimidation. The second was Voltage, who could generate and throw electrical arcs with enough power to stop a heart at 20 paces. The third was Jackrabbit, a speedster nowhere near A-Train's level, but fast enough to be a problem. They came at Toshinori from 3 directions, a coordinated assault designed to look spontaneous for the cameras already recording from concealed positions. Toshinori didn't run, didn't fight. He raised his hands in a gesture of peace and said something the boys couldn't hear from their position. Groundswell responded by throwing a car. The vehicle spun end over end through the air, 1.5 tons of Detroit steel, moving fast enough to pulp anything it hit, Toshinori caught it one-handed, the impact driving him backward 3 feet, but not knocking him down. He set the car down gently, carefully, as if it were made of glass and might contain passengers. "Jesus Christ," whispered. Voltage fired electricity arcing across the distance in jagged blue-white fury. Toshinori took the hit full in the chest, his body convulsing from the current, but he stayed on his feet. When the arc ended, smoke rose from his clothes, but he was still standing still, conscious, and his expression had shifted from tired patience to something harder. "I don't want to fight you," Toshinori said, and this time his voice carried across the distance, loud enough for the hidden microphones to catch every word. "You're being used. This is a setup." Jackrabbit hit him from behind, moving too fast for the eye to track a blur of motion that ended with a kick to Toshinori's spine. The big man stumbled forward, caught himself, turned to face his attacker. The speedster was already circling for another pass, grinning with the kind of mean joy that came from hurting someone and knowing you wouldn't face consequences. In the van, Butcher made a decision he'd probably regret later. Flashbangs. Frenchie, jamming equipment. We're going to scramble their recording gear. "And then," Huey asked. "And then we save a soup's life. God help us." The boys moved. MM's first flashbang detonated in the middle of the Vought film crew's position, the blast of light and sound, sending technicians scrambling for cover. Frenchie's jamming rig kicked on, flooding the area with white noise that turned every camera feed into static and every microphone into useless feedback. In the sudden chaos, Toshinori fought back. Groundswell charged in fists swinging with enough force to crack pavement. Toshinori didn't dodge, he redirected, catching the punch, and using its momentum to spin the larger soup around and into the path of Voltage's next electrical attack. Groundswell took the hit from his own teammate, went down hard and didn't get up quickly. Jackrabbit came in fast, rabbit punching from multiple angles, each impact designed to bruise and disorient rather than seriously injure. Toshinori weathered the assault, calculating timing and trajectory. And when the speedster made his next pass, one massive hand shot out and caught empty air exactly where Jackrabbit was about to be. The speedster ran face first into an open palm, moving at a relative velocity of 0, and the collision was almost comical. Jackrabbit rebounded, staggered, and went down in a heap. Voltage, seeing his team falling apart, made a desperate decision. He channeled everything he had into a single massive discharge electricity, playing across his body like a Tesla coil crossed with a lightning storm, and hurled it all at Toshinori in one concentrated blast. Toshinori moved faster than anything his size should move. Not super speed, just the explosive acceleration of someone who'd trained every muscle to respond to thought, without the delay of doubt. He was already airborne when the blast passed through the space he'd occupied, already descending in a controlled arc that ended with both feet planted and one fist cocked back. He could have shattered Voltage's skull. The boys watching from concealment could see the physics of it, the angle, the momentum, the raw strength. One punch, and this fight ended with a corpse. Instead, Toshinori's fist stopped an inch from Voltage's face. The wind pressure from the near miss was enough to knock the electrical soup backward into a wall. But the man was alive, conscious, and unbroken. "Stay down," Toshinori said. "Please." Voltage stayed down. The street fell silent except for the crackle of damaged electronics and the groans of defeated soups. Toshinori stood in the center of the destruction, breathing hard, his civilian clothes torn and scorched, but his posture still upright. Blood ran from a cut above his eye where Jackrabbit's kick had landed, and burns marked his chest where Voltage's electricity had cooked through fabric, but he was functional. He looked directly at the van where the boys were hiding. "You can come out now," he called. "I know you're there." Butcher muttered something profane, then kicked the van door open and stepped out. The others followed, weapons lowered, but ready. They formed a loose semicircle, maintaining distance, watching this new variable with the wariness of people who'd been burned too many times to trust anything that looked heroic. Toshinori studied them in turn. The tall one with the coat and the permanent scowl, the careful one with the tablet and tactical vest, the thin one who looked barely old enough to drink, the French one with the laptop, the young woman who watched him with eyes that had seen atrocities and survived them. "You jammed their recording equipment," Toshinori said. It wasn't a question. "Seemed like the right thing to do," Butcher said. "Under the circumstances." "Thank you." "Don't thank us yet, mate. We've got questions." "I imagine you do." Huey stepped forward before Butcher could stop him. "Why didn't you kill them?" "You could have. That last punch, you could have gone through him like paper." Toshinori's expression softened slightly. Because they were following orders. Because violence should be a last resort, not a first option. Because once you start killing people who inconvenience you, you stop being a hero and become something else. "That's real noble," Butcher said, his voice sharp with sarcasm. "But in case you haven't noticed, the people running this show don't give a damn about nobility. Vought owns this city, owns the government, owns the goddamn narrative. And what they can't own, they destroy. Then I'll have to be very difficult to destroy." Spoke up, his voice measured. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. Vought has resources you can't imagine. Legal teams, black ops divisions, politicians in every level of government. They'll come at you from angles you don't even know exist. I understand more than you think." Toshinori walked over to the nearest downed soup jackrabbit, still groaning, and checked his pulse, examined his injuries with practiced efficiency. Satisfied the speedster wasn't in immediate danger, he continued. "In my world, I've faced organizations that controlled nations' villains who could level cities. I know what institutional corruption looks like. Your world?" Frenchie looked intrigued. "You are not from here." "It's complicated." "It always is," Butcher said. He pulled out his flask, considered it, then offered it to Toshinori. "You want to sit down somewhere less exploded and talk about it?" Toshinori glanced at the flask, shook his head politely. "I don't drink. But yes, we should talk. Though perhaps somewhere your van isn't parked." Butcher actually grinned, a quick flash of teeth that held no warmth. "Smart man. Knew I liked you." The new safe house was actually just a different corner of the same warehouse, accessed through a route that involved 2 false walls and a maintenance tunnel. Kimiko led the way, moving with the fluid silence of someone who'd spent years being hunted. The space beyond was smaller than the main room, more cramped, but also more secure, one entrance, no windows, and enough concrete between them and the outside world to stop most surveillance. They gathered around a different table, this one with actual chairs that matched. Someone had made coffee at some point. It sat in a pot that looked like it predated the Nixon administration. But it was hot and caffeinated, and that was enough. Toshinori sat with his back to the wall, posture relaxed, but ready. The boys arrayed themselves opposite, and for a long moment nobody spoke. They were all running calculations, measuring risks, deciding how much truth to offer and how much to withhold. Finally, Huey broke the silence. "So, different world. That's really where you're going with this. It's the truth." "The truth is a flexible concept," Butcher said. "Vaught's told us the truth about 100 different soups who turned out to be sociopaths in spandex. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to judge me by my actions, not by what Vought says about me. Set down his coffee cup with a soft clink. Fair enough. So let's talk actions. You saved 60 people from that building yesterday. You didn't pose, didn't wait for permission, didn't check the angles. Why? Because they needed help. That's it. That's the whole reason. That's the whole reason. Butcher leaned back, studying Toshinori's face like it was a puzzle he couldn't solve. You know what, I almost believe you. Which is why I know you're going to get yourself killed in this world. Good intentions don't mean a damn thing when you're up against people who weaponize them. Then I'll need allies who understand the terrain. And what makes you think we want to ally with a soup? The question hung in the air, heavy with history and trauma, and all the reasons the boys existed in the first place. Kimiko's hand tightened on her knife handle. Frenchie went very still. M's expression hardened into the careful neutrality he wore when memories got too close to the surface. Huey looked at Butcher, then at Toshinori, then back at Butcher. Because he's not like them. We all saw it. Huey, no, we did. He had chances to kill those soups tonight. He didn't take them. He could have left after the building rescue, gone back to Vought, collected his paycheck. He didn't. He's been in this world for 48 hours, and he's already burned every bridge with the most powerful corporation on the planet, because he won't compromise on helping people. Huey's voice gained strength as he spoke, conviction overriding nervousness. That's not PR. That's not an act. That's just who he is. Toshinori looked at the young man with something like gratitude. You remind me of one of my students. He had your courage, your heart. I'm not sure if I'll ever see him again, or anyone from my world. For the first time since arriving in this universe, Toshinori let his exhaustion show not physical fatigue, but the bone-deep weariness of being stranded, displaced, fundamentally alone. But that doesn't change what I have to do here. People need protection. They need to know someone will stand between them and harm. That's what I was. That's what I am. Silence settled over the table again. But it was different now. Less hostile, more thoughtful. Spoke first. Okay. Let's say we believe you. Let's say you're genuine. What's your plan? You can't fight Vought head-on. They'll bury you in litigation and black ops and public opinion before you land a single punch. I don't plan to fight them. I plan to make them irrelevant. Butcher laughed, sharp and surprised. Oh, this I've got to hear. Toshinori straightened, and even sitting down, he seemed to fill more space. Vaught's power comes from being the only option. They control the Seven, they control the narrative, they control public perception of what heroes should be. But that control requires cooperation. If someone shows people a different model, someone who helps without contracts, who saves without demanding credit, who acts without waiting for approval, then Vought stops being the only game in town. You want to compete with them? Looked skeptical. On what resources they've got billions in capital, global infrastructure, media empires. They've got everything except what people actually need, which is someone who shows up when there's trouble and doesn't ask for anything in return. Frenchie's eyes lit up. Ah, you are not trying to beat them at their game. You are trying to change what game is being played. Exactly. Butcher took a long drink from his flask, then set it down with exaggerated care. All right, let's pretend that's not completely mental. Let's pretend you can actually pull off being some kind of freelance hero in a city owned by soups. You're still one man against an institution. How long you think you'll last? As long as it takes. That's not an answer, that's a fortune cookie. It's the only answer I have. Toshinori met Butcher's stare without flinching. I don't know this world. I don't know its politics or its corruption or how deep Vought's influence runs, but I know people. And I know that when you show them something real, something genuine, they recognize it. They respond to it. They respond until Vought turns them against you, said quietly. We've seen it happen. Character assassination, manufactured evidence, crisis actors. They're very good at destroying reputations. Then I'll have to make sure my actions speak louder than their accusations. Huey had been listening intently, and now he leaned forward. What if you're not alone? What if you had people feeding you information, helping you get ahead of Vought's moves, showing you where you're actually needed versus where they're setting traps? Toshinori turned to look at him fully. Are you offering? I might be. If... Huey glanced at Butcher, who was scowling but not interrupting. If you agree to some ground rules, because we're not your sidekicks. We're not going to follow you around and cheer. We're going to question everything, doubt your motives, and probably save your ass when you're too stubborn to save yourself. A genuine grin spread across Toshinori's face, the first real expression of joy he'd shown since arriving. That sounds perfect. Butcher groaned. Huey, you bleeding heart, I swear to God. We're doing this, Huey said firmly. You know we are. You've been looking for an angle against Vought since Becca. This is it. This is the angle. The name Becca fell into the conversation like a stone into still water. Ripples spread across Butcher's expression, anger and grief, and something more complicated chasing each other in quick succession. He looked at Toshinori with eyes that had forgotten mercy, but remembered purpose. You want our help, fine, but it comes with conditions. You don't kill. You don't torture. You don't make people collateral damage just because it's convenient. You stick to that Boy Scout routine, and the second you don't, we're gone. We'll expose you ourselves if we have to. Agreed. Just like that. No negotiation. Why would I negotiate? Those are my principles anyway. Butcher stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. You're either the real deal or the best actor I've ever met. Time will tell which. He stood extending a hand across the table. Welcome to the Resistance All Might. Try not to get us all killed. Toshinori shook, and the alliance was sealed. Immediately pulled out his tablet, switching into tactical mode. Okay. First thing we need is intelligence. Vought's going to escalate after tonight's failure. They'll hit you harder, probably more publicly. We need to know what they're planning before they do it. I can help with that, a voice said from the entrance. Everyone spun weapons appearing from concealed holsters and hidden sheaths. But the figure standing in the doorway raised both hands in surrender, her LED-accented costume glowing softly in the dim light. Starlight. How the hell did you find this place? Butcher demanded, but his gun stayed lowered. He'd worked with Annie January before in the complicated dance of information trading and mutual interest that defined their relationship. Followed you from the ambush site. I've been practicing stealth. She stepped fully into the room, and in the harsh fluorescent lighting, her exhaustion was visible. Dark circles under her eyes, tension in her jaw, the weight of wearing two faces, taking its toll. I can't keep doing this. Playing Vought's game while people get hurt. If you're making a move against them, I want in. Toshinori stood studying her. You were at the building yesterday. You helped evacuate the 3rd floor. I did what I was supposed to do. What I thought being a hero meant. Starlight's voice carried bitterness and determination in equal measure. Then I went back to the tower and listened to them strategize about how to spin your rescue into a liability. How to make you look dangerous. They're afraid of you, which means you're doing something right. Or something stupid, Butcher muttered. Both can be true. Starlight looked at Toshinori directly. I can give you access to Vaught's internal systems. Meeting schedules, deployment orders, PR strategies. Everything you'd need to stay 2 steps ahead. At considerable personal risk, Toshinori noted. I'm already at risk. We all are. The question is whether we take that risk doing the right thing or doing nothing. Huey was staring at her with something like awe. Looked thoughtful. Frenchie was already calculating how to use her access. Kimiko watched with the neutral expression of someone reserving judgment. Butcher walked over to Starlight, studying her face like he was reading a contract for loopholes. You understand what you're signing up for? Vought doesn't forgive traitors. They make examples. I understand. And you're willing to burn your entire career, everything you worked for, on the maybe that this works. I didn't work for this. This happened to me. Starlight's voice hardened. I wanted to save people. Vought wanted to sell me. If helping him, she gestured at Toshinori, means burning down the system that turned heroism into a product, then, yeah, I'm in. The room was silent for a beat. Then, Toshinori spoke, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood exactly what sacrifice meant. Thank you. But I need you to understand something. This won't be safe. It won't be clean. And there's a very real chance we all end up destroyed by the forces we're fighting. I know. And you're still willing? Starlight's answer was to pull a thumb drive from a hidden pocket in her costume and toss it to That's 3 months of internal communications. Meeting notes, deployment logs, blackmail files they keep on their own soups. Everything I could copy without triggering alerts. She looked back at Toshinori. So yeah, I'm willing. Plugged the drive into his tablet, his eyes widening as he scanned the contents. Jesus Christ. This is Annie if they catch you. They won't. I'm careful. Butcher was grinning now, the expression feral and delighted. Oh, this is going to hurt them. This is going to hurt them so good. Frenchie was already making plans, his accent thickening with excitement. With this information, we can anticipate their moves, yes. We can be where we are needed before Vought even knows there is a need. Exactly, Starlight said. She turned to Toshinori. You want to make them irrelevant? This is how. We give the people actual heroes. Ones who show up without fanfare, help without compensation, disappear without demanding gratitude. And we do it so consistently, so effectively, that Vaught's entire model starts to look like the sham it is. Toshinori nodded slowly, seeing the shape of the strategy. A war fought not with violence, but with proof. Proof that their way isn't the only way. And when they escalate, asked. Because they will. Vought doesn't lose market share quietly. Then we escalate back. But we do it cleanly. No civilians hurt, no collateral damage. We give them nothing to spin, nothing to weaponize against us. Butcher snorted. You make it sound easy. It won't be easy. It'll be the hardest thing any of us has ever done. Toshinori looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes in turn. But if we do this right, If we hold to principles, even when it's difficult, we can show people that there's another way, that heroes can exist without corporate oversight, that power can be used responsibly. Pretty speech, Butcher said. Let's see if you're still saying it when Homelander decides you're enough of a threat to handle personally. I'll say it then too, because it's not a speech. It's who I am. The alliance settled into practical details after that. Set up communication protocols, encrypted channels, dead drops, code phrases for emergencies. Frenchie established surveillance rotations and backup meeting locations. Kimiko mapped escape routes throughout the city. Huey cross-referenced Starlight's files with public records, building a database of Vaught's pressure points and vulnerabilities. And Toshinori sat with Annie, learning the ecosystem he'd stumbled into. The web of corporate influence, political corruption, and manufactured heroism that defined this world's relationship with people who had power. Homelander's the real problem, Annie said, pulling up a file that contained more redacted sections than actual information. He's not just strong, he's unstable. And Vought has spent billions making sure the public never sees that instability. What makes him unstable? He needs adoration the way normal people need oxygen. If you threaten that, if you make people question whether he's really the hero they think he is, he'll come after you with everything he has. Good. Annie blinked. Good? If he comes after me, he's not hurting anyone else. And if he loses control publicly, people see what Vaught's been hiding. He won't just lose control, he'll try to kill you. Toshinori's expression was calm, almost peaceful. He can try. Across the room, Butcher was having a similar conversation with This is mental. We've got a soup who talks like Captain America, acts like Superman, and expects us to believe he won't go full Homelander the second things get difficult. You don't believe that, said quietly. No. You believe exactly what Huey said, that he's genuine. That's why you're so afraid. Butcher's jaw tightened. I'm not afraid. You're terrified. Because if he's real, if he's actually what he appears to be, then every reason you've had for keeping Huey at arm's length falls apart. Every justification for staying cold and distant becomes an excuse instead of protection. Shut up, You wanted someone who could stand against Vought without becoming them. You've got him. Question is whether you're brave enough to actually work with someone who has hope. Butcher didn't answer. He just took another drink and watched Toshinori explain something to Annie with the patient intensity of a teacher who genuinely cared whether his student understood. The night deepened. Coffee was consumed and replaced and consumed again. Plans took shape, were discarded, reformed into better versions. By the time dawn started threatening the eastern horizon, the boys and their newest allies had the skeleton of a strategy. It was fragile. It was risky. It required perfect execution and more than a little luck. But it was something. Toshinori stood to leave as the first light filtered through cracks in the warehouse roof. I should go. If I'm going to maintain the appearance of being unaffiliated, I can't be traced to this location. Where will you go? Huey asked. Wherever I'm needed. Toshinori smiled, and even exhausted, even displaced from his entire world, that expression carried unshakable conviction. That's what heroes do. He left through the maintenance tunnel, his footsteps fading into the urban dawn. The boys watched him go, each processing the night's developments in their own way. Finally, Butcher spoke. Right. We're either about to save this city or get ourselves killed in spectacular fashion. Any bets on which? Both, said. Probably both. when outside in a city just beginning to wake, Toshinori Yagi walked alone, through streets that still didn't know what to make of him. Vought would be planning their next move. Homelander would be calculating how to eliminate a threat to his supremacy. The public would be forming opinions based on carefully curated information. But none of that mattered as much as the simple fact somewhere in this city, someone would need help today. And when they did, he would be there. The sun climbed higher, painting New York in shades of gold and shadow. In Vought Tower, executives were already assembling for an emergency meeting about their all-might problem. In a dozen safe houses across the city, the boys prepared for war. In her apartment, Annie January deleted security footage and covered her tracks, knowing she'd just crossed a line she could never uncross. And in the space between what the world expected and what it desperately needed, a symbol began to take shape. Not manufactured by corporations or controlled by handlers, just a man who refused to stop helping people, no matter what the cost. The question wasn't whether Vought would try to destroy him. The question was whether they'd succeed before he changed everything. The alert came at 8:17 p.m., during what Vaught's PR department had optimistically scheduled as their Evening of Heroes Gala, a black-tie fundraiser where politicians, celebrities, and the obscenely wealthy paid 5 figures per plate to eat rubber chicken and pretend they cared about philanthropy, while the 7 worked the room like products on display. Annie's text to was 3 words: "It's happening, now." In the surveillance van, parked 6 blocks from Vaught's glass and steel monument to itself. Read the message twice, then showed it to Butcher. No elaboration needed. They'd been waiting for this moment since the intelligence dump 3 days ago, since Starlight had revealed the outline of Vaught's endgame strategy. "Frenchie," Butcher said, already moving. "How long to get eyes inside? The building is on full lockdown for the event. But I have access to the traffic cameras, yes, and the news helicopters that Vought pays to cover their parties." Frenchie's fingers danced across keyboards, pulling up feeds faster than most people could think. Ah, mon Dieu. The screens filled with chaos. Not the controlled, choreographed disaster. Vought specialized in staging. Real chaos, the kind that happened when systems failed catastrophically and took human lives with them. The building's environmental controls had gone critical, flooding the lower levels with a chemical fire suppressant that was toxic in concentration. Emergency doors had sealed automatically, trapping 300 people, staff caterers, security maintenance workers, and sections rapidly filling with gas. Above them, in the pristine gala space, where champagne still flowed and orchestral music still played, the 7 mingled with donors who had no idea the servants and workers below were dying. "Jesus Christ," Huey breathed. "They're actually doing it. They're killing their own people." "Not killing," said, his voice tight with fury. "Motivating. Give Homelander a crisis to solve on live television. Make him look like a savior, pulling victims from the jaws of death, while the victims are people Vought put in that position in the first place." Butcher's hands clenched into fists. "Where's our boy?" Kimiko pointed to a different screen. Toshinori was 3 blocks away, mid-stride, his enhanced hearing having picked up the first screams before any alarm had sounded. He wasn't running. Running would have shattered pavement and broken windows, but his walking pace covered ground faster than most vehicles could manage in Manhattan traffic. He'll hit the building in 90 seconds, calculated. Homelander's still upstairs playing nice with senators. The timing is exactly what Vought wants. Annie's voice crackled over the encrypted channel. She was still inside, still wearing the mask of compliant superhero, while her earpiece fed her information that made her want to burn the building down herself. They're going to let the crisis escalate just long enough for maximum drama, then send Homelander down to save everyone, while their contracted news crews capture every angle. All Might shows up uninvited, starts interfering with their narrative. They paint him as the villain who made things worse, Huey finished. Make the public think he caused the emergency instead of responding to it. Butcher grabbed his jacket. Then we make sure the public sees the whole truth. Frenchie, I need you recording everything from every angle. Get ready to flood social media with unedited footage the second Homelander makes his move. Huey, I'm coming with you. For once, I'm not arguing. We're going to need all the witnesses we can get. The street-level entrance to Vaught's headquarters was a study in architectural intimidation. 40 feet of polished marble and steel with security checkpoints that could scan for weapons, explosives, and unauthorized chromosomes. Toshinori didn't bother with the doors. He hit the reinforced glass at an angle calculated to shatter the barrier without sending shrapnel into the lobby beyond, and the entrance imploded inward in a shower of fragments that fell like lethal rain. Alarms shrieked. Security soups materialized from concealed positions, hands glowing with various flavors of destructive intent. Toshinori raised both hands palms out in a gesture of peace that was also a warning. People are dying in your basement. You can try to stop me or you can help me save them. Choose quickly. The senior security officer, a woman whose file identified her as granite with skin that could turn to living stone, made the smart choice. Lower levels. Environmental system malfunction. Automated lockdown won't release until the fire suppressant dissipates, but that'll take hours, and the concentration is already lethal. Can you override the lockdown? Not without authorization from... Then I'll make my own authorization. Toshinori moved past them before they could decide whether to object, following the sound of muffled screaming through corridors designed to showcase wealth rather than facilitate rescue. The building's interior was all sharp angles and expensive art, with elevators that required biometric scanning and stairwells hidden behind unmarked doors. He found the first sealed emergency exit and tore the door off its hinges like it was made of cardboard. The metal screamed in protest, bolts shearing, but it opened. Beyond a stairwell descended into haze. The chemical fog had risen this far already, fingers of poison reaching upward. Toshinori descended into it without hesitation. The gas burned his lungs, immediately caustic and wrong, designed to suffocate flames, but equally effective at suffocating humans. He could taste copper and chemicals, feel his eyes watering. But he'd trained in conditions worse than this. UA had prepared its students for every kind of disaster, including the ones where the environment itself was trying to kill you. The first cluster of survivors huddled on a landing 2 floors down, a dozen kitchen staff, their uniforms marking them as the invisible labor that made galas possible. They looked up at Toshinori's arrival with expressions that cycled through terror, confusion, and desperate hope in rapid succession. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice roughened by the gas. An older woman, maybe the head chef, nodded. "Some of us." Maria twisted her ankle and Chen passed out from the fumes. "I'll carry them. The rest of you stay close behind me. Cover your faces with wet cloth if you have it. Move fast, but don't run." Understood? They understood. Survival was a language everyone spoke fluently when death came calling. Toshinori gathered the unconscious man across his shoulders and lifted the woman with the injured ankle as easily as picking up groceries. "Follow me. Don't stop for anything." The ascent was methodical. Toshinori set a pace the group could maintain while monitoring each person for signs of respiratory failure. The gas grew thicker as they climbed. It was actively being pumped in, he realized, with cold certainty. This wasn't a malfunction. This was deliberate. They emerged into the lobby just as the first news van arrived outside its crew, already setting up for coverage of what they'd been told would be a dramatic rescue. Toshinori handed off his 2 unconscious burdens to the security personnel, who'd had the sense to establish a triage area. "How many more down there?" Granite asked. "At least 200. Multiple levels. The gas is still being released. The system should have shut off automatically. It didn't. Which means someone made sure it wouldn't." Understanding flickered across her stone-transformed features. She'd worked for Vought long enough to know what the company was capable of, even if she'd never wanted to acknowledge it directly. You can't save them all alone. even with your strength. Then I'll save as many as I can. Which door leads to the mechanical systems? She pointed. Toshinori ran. The building's guts were a maze of pipes and conduits, all labeled with codes that meant nothing to him. But he didn't need to read labels to understand systems. Find the source, cut the flow, buy time for evacuation. Simple physics applied to desperate circumstances. He found the main gas distribution manifold buried 3 levels below ground. A sprawling mechanical beast surrounded by warning signs and fail-safe mechanisms that had all been carefully disabled. Someone had done this with planning and precision, turning safety features into murder weapons. Toshinori gripped the main feed pipe and pulled. Metal shrieked. Welds strained. The pipe was 6 inches of industrial steel designed to handle pressure that could liquefy bone, but physics still answered to sufficient force applied correctly. He braced himself against the concrete floor and heaved, channeling strength through his legs and core and arms, in a movement he'd practiced 10,000 times in training. The pipe tore free with a sound like a cannon shot. Pressurized gas exploded outward, a geyser of chemicals that would have shredded normal flesh. Toshinori held on, redirecting the flow away from occupied areas, letting it vent into the mechanical space until the pressure equalized and the system finally reluctantly shut down. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of escaping gas and the distant wail of sirens. Toshinori climbed back to the basement levels and started pulling people out. He worked systematically, floor by floor, carrying those who couldn't walk and guiding those who could. Each trip took minutes he didn't have. Each person saved meant dozens still waiting, but he refused to cut corners or leave anyone behind. This wasn't about speed. It was about everyone making it out alive. On his 4th descent, he found a section where the door had warped from heat jamming shut with people behind it. He could hear them pounding, screaming, their voices raw with terror and diminishing oxygen. The door was reinforced steel designed to contain fires. Toshinori hit it with a Carolina smash that sent the entire frame flying backward into the room beyond, creating an exit where none had existed. 23 people poured out, coughing and crying and alive. On his 7th trip, he encountered a man in a maintenance uniform who'd stayed behind, trying to manually override the ventilation system. "I almost had it," the man gasped, his fingers bloody from working controls without tools. "Just needed another minute. You did your job. Now let me do mine." Toshinori picked him up despite his protests and added him to the exodus. The lobby had transformed into a field hospital. Paramedics worked on the unconscious, distributing oxygen and treating chemical burns. The conscious sat in groups, shock blankets around their shoulders, staring at nothing, while their minds processed how close they'd come to dying in a basement while wealthy people ate dessert overhead. Butcher and Huey arrived as Toshinori emerged with his 9th group, and the look on Butcher's face was complicated. Vindication mixed with fury, satisfaction alongside rage. "They did this on purpose," Butcher said without preamble. "Vought. We've got evidence. Digital trails disabled safety systems, the whole fucking playbook." "I know." "You know, how do you—" Butcher stopped, seeing the answer in Toshinori's expression. "Right. You saw the mechanical room. Someone sabotaged it professionally. Very professionally. This wasn't improvised. This was planned. Huey was filming everything on his phone, capturing the survivors, the ongoing rescue, the evidence of systematic negligence. There are still people down there. How many more trips? As many as it takes." Toshinori turned back toward the basement, but granite blocked his path. "The structural integrity is compromised. You pulling that pipe might have prevented more gas release, but it also destabilized the support columns in that section. The building's groaning. If it collapses, then I'll hold it up while people get out. You can't. Watch me." He descended again, and this time the building protested audibly. Concrete cracked overhead. Support beams bent under redistributed loads. The architecture was eating itself, and there were still 40 people in the deepest section. Toshinori found them huddled in what had been a storage room, the youngest barely 18, the oldest maybe 70. They'd survived by finding a pocket where the gas concentration was slightly less lethal, but they were fading. Minutes from unconsciousness, maybe less. Everyone who can walk helps someone who can't. We're leaving now. The ceiling someone started. I'll handle the ceiling. You handle moving. They began the ascent, and above them, the building began its final surrender. A support column 3 floors up gave way, with a sound like the world ending. And suddenly Toshinori was holding up several tons of concrete and steel with his shoulders, while 40 people scrambled past him toward safety. The weight was immense. Not the heaviest thing he'd ever supported, he'd once held up falling debris while an entire city block evacuated in his world. But here now, with his strength already depleted from multiple rescues and gas inhalation, it pushed him to limits he hadn't tested in years. His legs shook. His vision narrowed. Every muscle in his body screamed for him to let go, to save himself, to prioritize survival over responsibility. He held on. The last person, the 70-year-old, moving slowly, but moving cleared the danger zone. Toshinori waited 3 more seconds to be sure, then released his burden and dove forward as the ceiling pancaked behind him, filling the stairwell with dust and destruction. He emerged into the lobby, covered in concrete dust and chemical residue, bleeding from a dozen minor wounds, breathing like a man who'd just run a marathon in a gas mask. Paramedics tried to approach, but he waved them off. The people from the basement. They need treatment first. Sir, I need you to help them. I'm fine. It was a lie, and everyone knew it. But Toshinori was already turning toward the next problem. Because while he'd been pulling people from a building, Vought had turned into a death sentence. The company had been executing the second phase of their plan. The gala attendees were being evacuated now, not because of any danger to them, but because Vaught's crisis managers had decided the optics of wealthy people fleeing while servants died looked bad, even by their standards. The 7 were making a show of helping Homelander, carrying out civilians with exaggerated care, while making sure the news crews caught his best angles. And then Homelander saw Toshinori. The shift in his expression was minute, a tightening around the eyes, a flattening of the mouth. But it transformed his entire presence from savior to predator in the space of a heartbeat. He set down the elderly donor he'd been carrying with less care than before, and walked toward Toshinori with the kind of deliberate stride that promised violence. "You," Homelander said, his voice carrying across the lobby despite speaking barely above conversational volume. "You damaged Vought property. You violated about 40 different regulations. And you put these people in danger with your reckless. I pulled them from a basement you were filling with poison gas." Toshinori interrupted, his voice flat with exhaustion and certainty. "While you were upstairs eating appetizers." Homelander's expression didn't change. But something flickered in those blue eyes. Surprise maybe that someone had actually interrupted him. People didn't interrupt Homelander. People feared him, worshipped him, obeyed him. They didn't talk back. "That's a serious accusation." Homelander said, his tone still superficially pleasant. "One you can't prove." "Actually," Huey said, stepping forward with his phone held high. "We can. Frenchie's already uploading the evidence to every platform that'll host it. Maintenance logs, disabled safety systems, the kill order buried in your crisis management protocols." Homelander turned to look at Huey, really look at him. And the young man went pale but held his ground. "You're Huey Campbell, the one whose girlfriend became a red smear when A-Train couldn't be bothered to watch where he was running." "Yeah, that's me." "You should be more careful about who you make accusations against. People who cross Vought tend to have accidents." "Is that a threat?" Butcher appeared at Huey's shoulder, his posture relaxed but ready. "On camera in front of witnesses, you threatening civilians. I don't make threats. I'm a hero." Homelander's expression transformed back into its public mask, warm, confident, the face that had sold 1 million action figures. I'm simply concerned for Mr. Campbell's well-being. These are dangerous times. Unauthorized soups running around, causing damage, putting innocent people at risk. He gestured at Toshinori. Take this guy, for example. Shows up out of nowhere, refuses to cooperate with proper authorities, and now he's destroyed expensive infrastructure to save 283 people your company tried to kill, Toshinori said. Each word was carefully chosen, deliberately calm. I understand you're frustrated that someone interfered with your publicity event. But these people, he gestured at the survivors receiving medical treatment. They're not props. They're not extras in your performance. They're human beings who almost died so you could look heroic saving them. The lobby went very quiet. News crews were recording this. Civilian phones were out. What happened next would be witnessed by thousands, and there was no walking it back. Homelander's mask slipped. Just for a second, but enough. The warmth drained from his expression, replaced by something cold and calculating and infinitely dangerous. You don't know what you're talking about. I think I do. I've seen this pattern before. Create a crisis position yourself as the solution, harvest the gratitude and worship. It's efficient, it's profitable, and it's morally bankrupt. Careful. Homelander took a step forward, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. You're making some very serious claims about America's greatest heroes. I'm making observations based on evidence. Your company disabled safety systems, created a lethal situation, and timed their response to maximize media coverage. That's not heroism. That's theater. And what makes you think you're qualified to judge? You're not even from this country. You're not even registered. You're just some foreign soup who thinks he can. I'm someone who pulls people from burning buildings. That's my entire qualification. I don't need registration or approval or corporate backing. I just need people who are in danger and the ability to help them. Homelander laughed, but the sound had nothing warm in it. You think it's that simple? You think you can just show up and save people and everyone will love you for it? I don't need anyone to love me. I need them to be alive. Something in Homelander's posture shifted. The pretense of civility evaporated like morning fog under harsh sunlight, and what remained was raw, focused hostility. You're making a mistake. A big one. Vought owns this city. We own the narrative. We own the heroes. And we don't take kindly to competition. Then perhaps you should try being better heroes instead of eliminating the competition. Homelander's eyes flashed red for just an instant, heat vision preparing to fire, restrained by habit more than conscience. Around them, civilians who understood what that glow meant scattered, putting distance between themselves and ground zero. Toshinori didn't move. He just stood there, covered in dust and blood and chemical residue, looking at the most dangerous man in North America with an expression that was equal parts compassion and immovable conviction. You want to fight me, Toshinori said quietly. I can see it. You want to prove you're stronger, faster, more important. But if we fight here, people will die. Innocent people who've already survived one crisis tonight. Then maybe you should leave. I will. After I make sure everyone's safe. After the paramedics have finished their work. After there's no one left who needs help. Toshinori met Homelander's glare without flinching. But if you genuinely want to settle this, if you need to prove whatever it is you think you need to prove, then we do it somewhere empty. Somewhere your laser vision and my strength won't hurt bystanders. The challenge hung in the air between them, weighted with implications. Homelander had never been challenged openly before, never had someone suggest he might lose a fight, never faced the possibility of being anything less than absolutely dominant. His response was to grab Toshinori by the front of his torn shirt and launch himself skyward. They went up fast. Homelander's flight achieving velocity that would have liquefied a normal human from the acceleration alone. The city fell away beneath them, buildings shrinking, streets becoming lines, people becoming dots. Higher and higher, until the air grew thin and cold, until Manhattan was a glowing grid spread below them like a circuit board. Homelander released Toshinori at altitude, and for a brief moment the big man hung suspended in nothing gravity reaching up to claim him. Then he began to fall. The descent was controlled chaos. Toshinori twisted in midair, orienting himself, calculating trajectories. He couldn't fly, that had never been part of his quirk, but he'd trained in aerial maneuvering since his early days at UA. Falling was just physics. Control the physics, control the outcome. Homelander hit him halfway down, moving at supersonic speeds, and the impact was catastrophic. They punched through a cloud layer, through the sound barrier momentum, carrying them on a ballistic trajectory that ended with both of them cratering into the East River hard enough to send up a geyser visible from New Jersey. Toshinori surfaced first, water streaming from his hair, his body already assessing damage. 3 cracked ribs, definite. Shoulder separation possible. Concussion probable. But nothing fatal. Nothing that would stop him from finishing this. Homelander emerged a second later, his costume pristine despite the impact, his hair somehow still perfect. He floated above the water, looking down at Toshinori with an expression that mixed satisfaction and confusion. "You're still alive," Homelander said, and he sounded genuinely surprised. "Most people that would have killed them." "I'm not most people." "No, you're really not." Homelander descended until he was hovering just above the water's surface. "Which makes this more interesting. Usually when I hit someone that hard, the fight's over. But you're actually going to make me work for it." "I don't want to fight you," Toshinori said, treading water, keeping his breathing even despite the pain radiating from his torso. "This doesn't have to happen." "Yes, it does." Homelander's expression shifted into something almost honest beneath the ego and the manufactured charm. There was something hungry and desperate and fundamentally broken. "You think you can just show up in my city, steal my thunder, make me look weak in front of cameras? There are rules. There's a hierarchy. And you need to learn your place in it. My place is wherever people need help. Nothing more, nothing less." "Wrong answer." Homelander hit him again, this time faster, and they went down into the river's murky depths. The water exploded around them as Homelander drove Toshinori toward the bottom, using his flight to generate crushing pressure to pin the larger man against silt and debris while trying to drown him. Toshinori's hands found Homelander's wrists, caught them, held them. Even underwater, even running on fumes and damaged anatomy, his grip was absolute. For the first time in Homelander's adult life, someone was physically restraining him, and he couldn't immediately break free. Panic flickered across the supposed hero's face. Not fear. Fear would require acknowledging vulnerability, but confusion, uncertainty. The horrible possibility that he might not be the strongest thing in the room. Toshinori used that moment of hesitation to reverse their positions, to surge upward with Homelander in his grasp, to break the surface and hurl the flying soup skyward before diving deep himself. When Homelander recovered and descended looking for his target, Toshinori was already gone, not fleeing but repositioning. The river was dark, cold, filled with decades of urban runoff and industrial waste. Perfect for hiding from someone who'd never had to hunt an opponent before. Homelander hovered above the water heat vision, charging, scanning for thermal signatures. "Hiding, really? That's your strategy?" No response. Just the lap of water against deteriorating piers and the distant sound of emergency vehicles on shore. "You can't hide forever. I can stay up here all night." "Can you hold your breath that long?" Still nothing. Homelander fired his heat vision into the water, flash boiling a section 10 feet across. Steam rose in clouds, obscuring visibility. "Come on. I thought you were supposed to be some kind of hero. Heroes don't hide. Heroes don't kill civilians to make themselves look good." Toshinori's voice came from behind him. He'd circled underwater, emerged silently 30 feet away. Heroes don't threaten people for telling the truth. And heroes definitely don't throw tantrums when someone saves lives more effectively than they do. Homelander's spun eyes already glowing. You think you're better than me. I think I'm trying to be what a hero should be. You're trying to be what Vought tells you to be. There's a difference. I don't take orders from anyone. Then why are you here? Why attack me instead of helping those people back at the building? Because Vought told you I was a threat to their business model. Toshinori was moving now, swimming laterally, making himself a harder target while continuing to talk. You're the most physically capable person on this planet, and you use that capability to protect a corporation's profit margins. It's pathetic. The word hit harder than any punch could have. Homelander froze, processing the accusation, his entire identity built on being superior. Suddenly confronted with the possibility that he was exactly the opposite. I'm not pathetic, he said, his voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous. I'm a hero. I'm the hero. I've saved thousands of lives. How many lives did you save tonight before I arrived? When people were dying in that basement, while you worked the room upstairs? I didn't know. You didn't want to know. Because knowing would have complicated the script. Better to wait for your cue. Make your entrance, save just enough people to look good for the press. Shut up. Why? Because the truth hurts. Because deep down you know I'm right. I said shut up. Homelander dive-bombed the water again. Hands outstretched to grab and crush and destroy this voice that was saying things he'd spent years not thinking about. Toshinori was ready. He'd been counting on rage, on impulsiveness, on the reaction of someone who'd never learned to control his emotions because he'd never had to. As Homelander plunged beneath the surface, Toshinori met him with an Oklahoma smash that caught the flying soup in mid-dive and redirected his momentum straight down into the river bottom. The impact crater in the riverbed was impressive. Homelander emerged, stunned not hurt. His invulnerability was genuine, but experiencing for the first time in his memory what it felt like to be physically dominated. I don't want to hurt you, Toshinori said, surfacing again, putting distance between them. But I will defend myself, and I will not let you hurt innocent people. Homelander floated up slowly, his costume muddy now, his hair finely disheveled. He looked at Toshinori with an expression that cycled through a dozen emotions. In as many seconds, rage, confusion, something that might have been respect, and underneath it all, a kind of desperate need for validation that bordered on pathological. Nobody talks to me like this, Homelander said finally. Nobody challenges me. They worship or they die. Then they're not seeing you. They're seeing what Vought built. The costume, the marketing, the carefully constructed narrative. Toshinori swam closer, close enough to see the micro-expressions playing across Homelander's face. But underneath all that, you're just a person who was given incredible gifts and never taught how to use them responsibly. You don't know anything about me. I know enough. I know that kind of emptiness. That need to be loved because you've never believed you're worth loving without the cape and the powers. Toshinori's expression softened slightly. In my world, we call it imposter syndrome. The fear that if people saw who you really are, they'd realize you're not special at all. Homelander's hands clenched into fists, heat vision flickering. I am special. I'm the most powerful being on this planet. And what have you done with that strength beyond make Vought money and feed your own need for adoration? The silence stretched between them, broken only by the slap of water against shoreline. Around them, the city continued its rhythm, unaware that two beings capable of leveling buildings were having a philosophical argument while treading water in the East River. Finally, Homelander spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. What else is there? The question was so genuinely lost, so completely sincere, that it broke through Toshinori's defensive posture entirely. This wasn't the theatrical villain he'd expected. This was someone who'd been created as a weapon, marketed as a product, and never given the chance to be anything resembling a complete human being. "There's everything else," Toshinori said gently. "There's helping people because they need help, not because it profits you. There's using your strength to protect the weak instead of enforcing hierarchies. There's being good because it's right, not because it's profitable. That's naive, maybe, but it's also what separates heroes from people with strength." Homelander looked at him for a long moment, and in that look was the weight of a lifetime of careful programming colliding with the first genuinely different perspective he'd ever encountered. Something shifted behind those blue eyes, not agreement, not conversion, but the smallest crack in the absolute certainty he'd wrapped himself in. Then the moment passed, his expression hardened. The wall went back up, and the manufactured confidence reasserted itself. "You're wrong. About me. About how this world works. About everything." "Then prove it. Come back to the building with me. Help finish the evacuation. Do it without asking for credit or positioning yourself for the best camera angles. Just help because people need it. And if I don't, then you prove my point. That you're not a hero. You're just a corporate asset pretending to be one." Homelander floated higher. Considering, his PR's training warred with his ego, his genuine loneliness fought against his need to dominate, and underneath it all, the desperate hunger for approval gnawed at everything he was. "I'll think about it," he said finally. Then he shot upward, breaking the sound barrier, leaving Toshinori alone in the water with the echo of sonic boom fading across the harbor. Toshinori treaded water for another minute, catching his breath, assessing damage. 3 cracked ribs confirmed. Shoulder separation confirmed. Concussion probable, but manageable. Overall, he'd been in worse shape after training exercises. He swam to shore and pulled himself onto a deteriorating pier, water streaming from his clothes. His body already starting to protest the abuse it had endured tonight. The city's skyline glowed against the night skylights, marking millions of lives going about their business, unaware of how close they'd come to being collateral in a fight between titans. His phone miraculously still functional despite everything buzzed with messages. Asking for status. Huey wanting to know if he was alive. Butcher demanding updates with his usual charm. And one from Annie. Homelander just landed on the tower roof. Looks pissed, but unhurt. What happened? Toshinori typed back. Gave him something to think about. Heading back to help with final evacuations. The walk back to Vought's building took 20 minutes. By the time he arrived, the lobby had been fully converted to a crisis center. The last of the basement survivors had been brought up. Medical personnel were conducting final assessments, and the news crews had descended like carrion birds to pick over the story. Butcher and Huey met him at the entrance, both of them looking like they'd aged a decade in the past hour. "You look like hell," Butcher observed. "I feel worse than I look." "That's saying something." "Did you kill him?" "I didn't try to kill him. I tried to reach him." Butcher laughed, sharp and humorless. "How'd that work out?" "Unclear, but he didn't kill me either, so that's progress." Appeared with a first aid kit already cataloging injuries with practiced efficiency. "We need to get you to a hospital. After everyone else is safe." Toshinori, after everyone else? They knew better than to argue. Instead, they worked together to assist the remaining evacuations, to coordinate with actual emergency services, to ensure that every single person who'd been in that basement tonight made it to medical treatment. It was 3 a.m. before the last ambulance pulled away. The building stood wounded but stable. Its lobby destroyed, its basement sections condemned, but its victims all accounted for and alive. 283 people who'd woken up that morning with no idea they'd be used as props in a cynical publicity scheme had survived to see another day. Toshinori sat on the steps of the building, finally allowing himself to stop moving, to acknowledge the accumulated damage and exhaustion. Annie found him there, her costume still pristine, but her expression showing the strain of maintaining appearances while everything she believed in burned around her. "You did it," she said, sitting beside him. "Everyone made it out. We did it. I couldn't have found them all without your intel. Couldn't have shut down the gas without knowing where to look. Still, you went into a collapsing building multiple times, held up a ceiling so people could escape, fought Homelander to a standstill." She paused. "Are you actually human?" "Mostly, with one significant modification." He looked at his hands, still trembling slightly from exertion. "But the strength is just a tool. What matters is choosing to use it for others instead of yourself." Homelander doesn't see it that way. No, he sees strength as proof of worth, as justification for hierarchy, as a weapon to maintain status. Toshinori closed his eyes briefly. I felt sorry for him there at the end. He's incredibly capable and utterly lost. Don't waste your sympathy. He's killed people, destroyed lives, all to maintain his image. I know, but understanding why someone became what they are doesn't excuse what they've done. It just makes the tragedy clearer. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the city begin its transition from night to morning. Somewhere in Vought's executive suites, crisis managers were assembling damage control strategies. Somewhere in police precincts, reports were being filed and evidence cataloged. Somewhere in a million homes, people were waking up to news that would challenge everything they thought they knew about heroes. Huey approached with coffee from an all-night deli, distributing cups to the various members of their impromptu coalition. Frenchie says the evidence uploads are getting traction. Major news outlets are picking up the story about the disabled safety systems. Vought's stock is already dropping in pre-market trading. They'll fight back. Predicted. Crisis PR counter-narratives probably sue everyone involved. Let them, Toshinori said. We have the truth. And we have witnesses. 283 witnesses who know what really happened tonight. Butcher dropped down beside them, flask in hand, but not drinking from it. You know this isn't over, right? Vought's not going to take this lying down. They'll come after all of us. Hard. I know. And you're okay with that, putting a target on your back, making yourself enemy number one to the most powerful corporation in the country. Toshinori stood, his body protesting every movement, but his expression resolute. I came to this world by accident. I didn't choose to be here. But now that I am, I have to be what I've always been. Someone who shows up when people need help. Someone who refuses to compromise on protecting the innocent. He looked at each of them in turn, Butcher with his cynicism, Huey with his idealism, with his pragmatism, Annie with her conflicted loyalty. You've all made that same choice in your own ways. To fight when it would be easier to walk away. That's what makes you heroes, regardless of what Vought says. Pretty speech, Butcher said, but without his usual sarcasm. Still doesn't change the fact that we're probably all going to die for this, maybe. But at least 283 people won't die tonight. That's worth the risk. The sun broke over the horizon, painting the city in shades of gold and red. A new day beginning. A new battle starting. But for this moment, standing on the steps of a building they'd saved from becoming a mass grave, they allowed themselves to feel something uncommon in this world of manufactured heroes and cynical manipulation. Hope, not the naive kind. Not the brand Vought sold in 30-second commercials. But the real thing, hard-earned, blood-bought, forged in the fire of choosing principle over profit. Somewhere high above, in a penthouse that commanded views of everything below Homelander, stood at a window and watched the sun rise. His hands were clenched. His jaw was tight. And in his chest, beneath the costume and the ego and the decades of programming, something was breaking. Not his loyalty to Vought. Not his need for worship. Not his fundamental belief in his own supremacy, but the absolute certainty that he would win. That he was unbeatable. That no one could challenge him and survive. All Might had challenged him and survived. had fought him to a standstill and walked away, had said things that echoed in his mind like accusations he couldn't shake, and worst of all, had made him wonder just for a moment in that river if maybe there was another way to be. The thought was terrifying. So he crushed it, buried it, replaced it with rage and plans for revenge, and renewed determination to prove that he was still the apex predator in this ecosystem. But the seed was planted, and seeds, given time and pressure, had a habit of growing into things that shattered stone. The war was just beginning. The counterattack began exactly 48 hours after the gala incident, which was how long it took Vaught's legal division to assemble their response and their crisis management team to workshop the narrative. The lawsuit was comprehensive. Destruction of property, reckless endangerment, interference with emergency protocols, unauthorized entry, criminal trespass, and most creatively emotional distress suffered by gala attendees who witnessed the violence. The damages sought were in the hundreds of millions, a number calculated not to win, but to bury any defendant under legal fees until they suffocated. Named parties included Toshinori Yagi, William Butcher, Hugh Campbell, and a dozen John Does that Vaught's investigators were already working to identify. The message was clear: help. All Might and Vaught would destroy your life with paperwork. By noon of that same day, every major news network was running variations of the same story. Not the one Huey had uploaded, that footage had been scrubbed from mainstream platforms within hours, relegated to fringe sites and message boards where truth went to die of irrelevance. Instead, the narrative flowing from official channels painted a picture of a rogue soup, possibly unstable, possibly foreign, who'd caused millions in damage, while Vaught's actual qualified professionals worked to contain the crisis he'd created. The evidence was manufactured, but convincing. Edited footage showing Toshinori tearing through the lobby. Testimony from witnesses describing his aggressive behavior. Expert analysis suggesting the basement situation had been minor until his interference escalated it. A particularly damning segment featured a structural engineer explaining how removing that gas pipe had destabilized load-bearing supports and endangered everyone in the facility. The 283 people who knew the truth found themselves suddenly unable to share it. Some had signed NDAs as part of their employment. Others received visits from Vaught's legal team with offers of compensation in exchange for silence. A few who tried to speak up found their social media accounts suspended. Their interviews rejected by editors, their voices systematically erased from the conversation. By the third day, public opinion was turning. The initial wave of sympathy for the mysterious rescuer was being replaced by questions about accountability, about regulation, about whether vigilante soups were really what society needed. In the converted warehouse that served as their headquarters, the boys watched the narrative shift with the grim recognition of people who'd seen this pattern before. "It's what they do," MM said, scrolling through his tablet, where algorithm-boosted content painted Toshinori as everything from a terrorist plant to a publicity-seeking fraud. They own the platforms, they own the influencers, they own the fact-checkers. Truth doesn't matter when you control the megaphone. Butcher sat at the table, his flask open but untouched, staring at nothing. "We knew this would happen. Vaught doesn't fight fair. They fight with lawyers and PR firms and bought politicians." "So what do we do?" Huey asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer wouldn't be satisfying. "We keep fighting, same as always. Same as we've been doing for years." Butcher finally took a drink, the liquid burning familiar. "We expose them where we can. We save who we can save. We accept that most people will never know the truth, because the truth is too inconvenient for the system that feeds them." Frenchie emerged from his corner workspace, his expression troubled. "I have been monitoring the chatter on the darker corners of the internet. The conspiracy boards, the unmoderated forums, there are people who believe Toshinori's version. Not many, but some. They are organizing, making plans to demonstrate, to protest, to demand independent investigation. Vought will crush them, said. But they will try anyway. Because some people, they need to believe that truth matters more than power. Kimiko, who'd been silent throughout the discussion, signed a question. Frenchie translated. She asks, "Where is All Might? Why is he not here?" The question hung in the air unanswered, because none of them knew. Toshinori had left the morning after the confrontation, his injuries treated enough to function his destination unspecified. No messages, no check-ins, just gone like morning fog burned away by a sun too bright to look at directly. Across the city, in a neighborhood where tourists didn't venture and gentrification hadn't yet arrived, Toshinori sat on a fire escape outside a studio apartment he'd rented with cash from doing day labor. His ribs were taped, his shoulders stabilized, his body healing at the accelerated rate his quirk provided when he wasn't actively depleting it. Below, the street carried on its rhythm. A bodega owner swept his storefront. Kids played handball against a wall covered in layers of graffiti that told the neighborhood's history in spray paint. An elderly woman pulled a shopping cart full of laundry toward the laundromat 3 doors down. Normal life. The kind that didn't make news or generate clicks or feature in anyone's narrative about what mattered. Toshinori watched it all with the attention of someone learning a new language, the patterns, the relationships, the small kindnesses and casual cruelties that made up the actual texture of human existence when you stripped away the performance of it. His phone buzzed. A message from Annie. "They're coming after everyone. The lawsuits are just the beginning. You need to leave the city. Maybe leave the country." And he typed back, "I can't run from every fight." Her response was immediate. "This isn't a fight you can win with your fists. Vought has infinite resources. They'll bleed you dry in court, destroy your reputation. Make sure you can never help anyone again, because everyone will be too afraid to accept help from you. Then I'll help people who aren't afraid. Toshinori, please, I'm serious. They're going to destroy you." He looked at his hands, scarred and calloused from a lifetime of using them to protect others. Young Midoriya had asked him once what it meant to be the greatest. Toshinori's answer had been simple. It meant showing up when no one else would. It meant being the thing people could count on when everything else failed. That hadn't changed just because the world around him had. "I appreciate your concern," he typed. "But I didn't come this far by running when things got difficult. I'll face whatever Vought brings, same as I face everything else." The dots appeared and disappeared several times as Annie typed and deleted responses. "Finally, you're going to get yourself killed. Or worse, you're going to get everyone around you killed. Is that what you want?" He considered the question seriously. Not the rhetorical version she'd intended, but the actual inquiry beneath it. Did his presence endanger the people who'd chosen to stand with him? Almost certainly. Would Vought use them as leverage, as targets, as weapons against him? Probably. But abandoning them wouldn't change that calculus. Vought would still come after the boys. They'd been thorns in the corporation's side long before Toshinori arrived. Annie would still be caught between her conscience and her contract. The people who'd survived the gala would still face pressure to recant their stories. His leaving would just mean they'd face it alone. "I'll be careful," he typed. "But I won't disappear. These people need to know someone's still fighting for them." No response came. Annie had either given up or been called away to some corporate obligation that required her to smile and pretend everything was fine. Toshinori pocketed his phone and descended the fire escape. his body Petersburg testing the movement, but functional. The bodega owner looked up as he passed, offered a brief nod of recognition. Not worship, not fear, just acknowledgement that someone existed in shared space. Coffee? The owner asked, his accent placing him somewhere in the Middle East, originally his presence here marking him as another transplant, navigating a world that hadn't been designed with him in mind. Please. The coffee was terrible, which somehow made it better. Toshinori paid exact change and carried the cup to a bench where he could watch the street and think about paths forward. He'd fought governments before. He'd stood against villains who could reshape reality. He'd carried the weight of an entire society's hope while his body was literally destroying itself from the strain. But Vought wasn't a villain in the traditional sense. They didn't monologue about plans for world domination or cackle while committing atrocities. They just optimized for profit and let the atrocities happen as externalities. They weaponized normalcy, made evil banal, turned human suffering into line items on quarterly reports. Fighting them required different tools than the ones he'd spent his life mastering. His phone buzzed again. This time, Butcher. Need to talk. Same place as before. 1 hour. Toshinori checked the time, finished his terrible coffee, and started walking. The city was different at street level than it appeared from the heights where Homelander flew or the polished lobbies where Vought did business. Down here it was all persistence and survival people carving out existence in the margins while titans fought overhead. The meeting location was a different part of the same warehouse complex, accessed through a route that suggested Butcher changed hideouts the way normal people changed shirts. The boys were all present when Toshinori arrived, their expressions ranging from grim determination to exhausted resignation. Right. Butcher began without preamble. We've got a decision to make. Vought's lawsuits are designed to force capitulation. We can fight them in court, lose slowly while they drain our resources, or we can fold, take their settlement money, sign their NDAs, and go back to operating in the shadows, where we're harder to target. That's not a real choice, Huey said. If we take their money, we're admitting they won. That they can do whatever they want, as long as they're willing to pay for silence afterward. It's the smart choice, MM countered. We regroup, rebuild live to fight another day. Sometimes tactical retreat is the right move. And sometimes it's just retreat, Huey shot back. We finally have evidence. We have witnesses. We have proof that Vought deliberately endangered their own people. If we walk away now, we survive. Butcher interrupted. Which is more than we can say if we keep fighting this fight out in the open, where they can crush us with the full weight of their institutional power. The argument continued, voices rising, old tensions surfacing. Toshinori listened without interrupting, recognizing the fundamental divide. Some people fought until they won or died trying. Others fought until they could retreat to fight another day. Both strategies had merit. Both had costs. Finally, Kimiko made a sharp gesture that cut through the argument. She signed something rapid and emphatic, her expression fierce. Frenchie translated, his voice quiet. She says we are asking the wrong question. The question is not whether we fight or retreat. The question is what we are fighting for. If we are fighting to destroy Vought, we have already lost. They are too big, too connected, too deeply embedded in the system. But if we are fighting to show people that another way is possible, that soups do not have to be products, that strength can be used for service instead of domination. He paused, meeting each person's eyes. Then perhaps we have already won, because Toshinori showed them. 283 people saw an alternative, and no lawsuit can erase what they witnessed. The room went quiet. Outside, the city continued its evening transition, millions of people heading home from jobs they hated to apartments they couldn't afford, carrying on because carrying on was what humans did best. "She's right," Annie said, her voice coming through the encrypted channel, though she wasn't physically present. Vought can control the narrative, but they can't change what happened. Those people know the truth, and some of them will tell others. And eventually, maybe the truth spreads far enough that it becomes harder to suppress than to acknowledge. "That's a long game," MM observed. "Could take years, decades." "Then we play the long game," Toshinori said, speaking for the first time since arriving. "In my world, the symbol of peace wasn't built in a day. It was built through consistent action over time. Every person saved, every crisis resolved, every moment of showing up when others would have walked away. That's how you change what people believe is possible." Butcher studied him with an expression somewhere between admiration and exasperation. "You really believe that, don't you? That if you just keep being good and helpful and bloody noble, eventually the system will have to acknowledge it." "I believe the system is made of people, and people can change their minds when presented with evidence that contradicts their assumptions." Toshinori held Butcher's stare. "You've dedicated your life to exposing Vought's corruption. That's noble too, even if you'd never call it that. We're fighting the same fight from different angles." Pretty words, but words don't stop lawsuits. "No, but actions do. If I keep helping people, if we all keep doing the work that needs doing, eventually the lawsuits become background noise. Vought can tie me up in court for years, but they can't stop me from being there when someone needs help. They can smear my reputation, but they can't change the fact that I'll show up anyway." "They can make it illegal for you to show up," MM said. "Injunctions, restraining orders, regulations specifically targeting unauthorized soups. They've done it before. Then I'll break those laws." Toshinori's voice was calm, certain. "Because there are laws written by legislators, and there are laws written into the fabric of what's right. When they conflict, I know which one I'm following." Huey was grinning now, that idealistic expression Butcher usually tried to suppress but couldn't quite manage. "So we keep going. We keep exposing them. We keep helping people. We make ourselves such a persistent problem that it costs more to fight us than to ignore us. We make ourselves indispensable," Annie added. "Not to Vought, to the people they've been exploiting. We build networks they don't control. We create alternatives they can't buy." Butcher looked around the room at the faces of people who should have known better than to hope, and sighed. "Fine, we do this the stupid, idealistic, probably suicidal way. But when Vought comes for us, and they will come, nobody gets to say they weren't warned." "Agreed," Toshinori said. They spent the next hour planning not the grand strategy that would topple an empire, but the small, practical steps that might make tomorrow slightly better than today. MM would work on legal defense, finding pro bono attorneys willing to fight billion-dollar corporations for principle. Frenchie would maintain their digital infrastructure, keep information flowing through channels Vought didn't control. Huey would coordinate with the survivors, build a network of people willing to speak truth even under pressure. Annie would stay inside Vought, feeding intelligence, being the voice of conscience in a building designed to suppress it. And Toshinori would do what he'd always done, show up when people needed help. Simple. Impossible. The only option that felt like living, rather than slowly surrendering by degrees. When the meeting ended and people dispersed to their various assignments, Butcher caught Toshinori's arm. "You know this doesn't end well, right? Even if we win, even if we somehow manage to expose Vought and bring them down, there'll be another corporation waiting to replace them. Another system built on exploitation. Another hierarchy maintained by people with power. I know. And you're okay with that. With fighting a war, you can never actually win. Toshinori thought about young Midoriya, about Bakugo, about all the students he'd trained to carry the torch when he no longer could. About the cycle of mentorship and responsibility that meant no individual had to win every battle, only fight the ones in front of them well enough to pass something better to the next generation. Winning isn't the point, he said. The point is not letting the system win by default, because we were too tired to keep fighting. The point is showing people that resistance is possible, that another way exists, that strength can be used for service instead of domination. He met Butcher's cynical gaze with something that wasn't quite a smile. You already know this. It's why you haven't given up either. Butcher snorted, pulled out his flask, discovered it was empty, and put it away with a grimace. Yeah, well, difference is, I know I'm tilting at windmills. You seem to genuinely believe the windmills might fall over. They might, if enough people push. And if they don't, then at least we pushed. And maybe someone watching learned that pushing was an option. They parted, without further words, each heading into a night that held no promises except the certainty of continued struggle. Toshinori walked back through streets where evening was settling into full darkness, where streetlights flickered on and neon signs advertised dreams that wouldn't come true. His phone buzzed one last time. A message from a number he didn't recognize. The people you saved want to thank you. We're organizing a gathering. No press, no publicity. Just us. Will you come? He stared at the message for a long moment, thinking about symbols and substance, about public gestures and private gratitude, about what it meant to be seen versus what it meant to be understood. Yes, he typed back. Tell me when and where. Because that was the work. Not the grand battles against flying tyrants or the legal warfare against corporate machines. But the quiet moment of showing up when people who'd been abandoned by every system asked if anyone cared, whether they lived or died. The answer had to be yes. Had to be always. Had to be regardless of cost or consequence or the impossibility of fixing everything. Above him, somewhere in a penthouse that commanded views of the entire city, Homelander stood at his window and watched the lights below. He'd won, according to every metric that mattered to Vought. The lawsuits were filed. The narrative was controlled. The threat was contained. So why did victory feel hollow? Why did that conversation in the East River keep echoing in his mind, questions he'd spent his whole life not asking? Suddenly demanding answers, he pushed the thoughts away, buried them under layers of ego, and manufactured confidence and the comfortable certainty that he was superior to everyone and everything. But the burial was less complete than before. And seeds once planted had a way of growing in darkness until they broke through stone. The city stretched out below them both, the flying God King and the grounded symbol, each choosing their path forward. One toward continued domination enforced by fear and corporate backing. The other toward continued service despite opposition and institutional resistance. Between them, millions of ordinary people went about their lives unaware they were standing at a crossroads, that the question of what heroes could be was being asked in ways that would ripple forward into futures they'd never see. Some of those people were the ones Toshinori had pulled from toxic gas and collapsing ceilings. They carried his example now whether they meant to or not. The knowledge that someone had chosen them over profit, over safety, over the easy path. That knowledge would spread slowly and perfectly against all the machinery designed to suppress it. But it would spread. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered. Not defeating Vought, not bringing down Homelander, not fixing a broken system overnight. Just proving one action at a time that another way was possible. That strength could serve rather than dominate. That heroes could exist without corporate sponsorship. That someone would show up, would be there, would help not for glory or profit, but because it was right. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. But for the first time in a long time, the people fighting it believed they might not be fighting alone.